So good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar to present our updated Refsum Diet Guidelines. My name is Susan Karanoff, and I am the co-founder and vice president of the Global DARE Foundation, and I'll be your host today. I'm joined today, I'm joined today by Eleanor Baldwin, honorary dietitian, who has been advising on the Refsum diet since 2003 at Guy's and St. Thomas, as well as Sarah Firman, who has been working as a dietitian for the Adult Inherited Metabolic Disorders at Guy's and St. Thomas since 2017. So today's agenda, we will cover a few housekeeping details, as well as a short introduction to the Global DARE Foundation. Then we'll move to the long-awaited Refsum updated diet guidelines, and then we'll finish with a Q&A session. The Global DARE Foundation was established in 2019, so we're now into our 5th year of being. DARE stands for Defeat Adult Refsum Everywhere. Our mission is to promote worldwide awareness and better quality of life for all those who are impacted by Refsum. Our goal is to support research, education initiatives, awareness campaigns, and patient advocacy. Driving research is at the core of everything we do, as we do dare to believe that there is eventually a cure for Refsum disease. Both Sarah and Eleanor support the Global DARE Foundation's mission as valuable members of our Medical and Scientific Advisory Board. Additionally, they are key members of the subcommittee that has overseen the phytanic acid food testing program that has currently been funded by the Global DARE Foundation. With them and the members of our Medical and Scientific Advisory Board, we are raising awareness for Refsum. We are driving better treatment and care, as well as reinvigorating the research into better therapies for Refsum disease. Now on to a few housekeeping details. All participants in this webinar are in listen mode only without video. If you have any questions, please type them in the Q&A box on the right-hand side of your screen. It will not be possible to unmute to ask your questions verbally. At the end of the presentation, I will be moderating the Q&A session, and should any questions not get answered due to time constraints, then we'll follow up with written responses. Just want to also advise that today's session is being recorded for later viewing on the Global DARE Foundation YouTube channel, as well as our website. And with that, I'll now turn over to Eleanor to kick off the presentation.
So good afternoon. I'd like to start off, next slide please, just with a little recap on the factors that influence phytanic acid levels in the blood. So the research base shows that phytanic acid levels build up in the blood of a person with adult Refsum disease in 2 ways. Firstly, and primarily, from eating foods high in phytanic acid. The second way that phytanic acid comes into the blood is from the release of phytanic acid from body fat stores. And the release of phytanic acid from body fat stores occurs in a number of different situations. So it occurs during fasting, when you're not eating. It occurs during illness. It occurs if you don't eat enough carbohydrate. It occurs if you exercise and you don't fuel appropriately when you exercise. And we also know that phytanic acid is released from the body fat during weight loss and if people consume a lot of caffeine or other stimulants. Next slide, please. The Westminster Refsum diet has been studied extensively in the past, and its effect on the phytanic acid level of patients following that diet has also been evaluated. And we have shown that that diet is effective in gradually reducing the blood phytanic acid levels of people with adult Refsum disease. The diet works by restricting phytanic acid intake to a level that we believe is below the level that most people can metabolize. And it also works by reducing the release of phytanic acid from the body stores by trying to address these factors that I mentioned earlier. So having regular meals that contain carbohydrate at each meal, making sure that you are eating enough calories for your energy requirements, making sure that you fuel adequately for your exercise, that you use a glucose-based emergency regimen when you're not well, and that you avoid rapid weight loss or any weight loss at all if your phytanic acid levels are high, and that you avoid foods that are high in caffeine. Having said that, our research has shown in the past that some people do not respond as well to the Westminster Refsum diet. So some people's blood phytanic acid levels will respond really well. They'll gradually come down over time and they'll end up with very low phytanic acid levels in the blood. Some people will end up with moderate levels of phytanic acid level in the blood, so they'll have a response, but not quite as strong a response to the diet. And some people will not have a very good response to the diet. So it's that group of people who don't have a good response to the diet that we wanted to try and help when we looked at the research that came out of the dietary analysis process, the food analysis, and also that came out of some more sort of recent research. So in 2022, we launched a new diet, which was based on a traffic light system. And that traffic light system took into account food analysis data on phytanic acid, on phytol fatty acid esters, and on free phytol. Because some research suggested, and this research was experimental research, it was not research based on looking at what happens to an actual person. So it was experimental research. And that research had suggested that free phytol and phytol fatty acid esters may well be absorbed in the gut, and that they may well influence a person's blood phytanic acid levels if they have adult Refsum disease. So the new diet guidelines in 2022 took those three types of potential sources of phytanic acid and gave them equal merit and put them into the diet in a traffic light system. However, we were at the time aware that there wasn't a big degree of certainty about how the phytol fatty acid esters or the free phytol, if 1 milligram of each or 10 milligrams of phytanic acid compared with 10 milligrams of phytol fatty acid esters compared with 10 milligrams of free phytol, we don't know if those all behave the same way. And that was our big sort of level of uncertainty. Next slide, please. So this year, and it's taken us a while to really have a very good think about our strategy. In our new strategy for 2024 was a rethink around the information that we had released in 2022. So because we do not know how free phytols and phytol fatty acid esters are absorbed in the gut and how they influence phytanic acid levels in the blood, Because we had feedback from people with adult Refsum disease saying that they found that the new diet guidelines didn't necessarily improve their readings. And we also had feedback from dietitians that they felt that in some cases, people then were not following what we feel are probably quite important dietary guidelines. So they were all of those factors meant that we felt that there should be a rethink about how we present the dietary guidelines. So we've tried to take on board the feedback we've had and come up with some new dietary guidelines. Next slide, please. So the new dietary guidelines very much go back to thinking about how people responded to the Westminster Refsum diet. So you'll remember I said that with following the Refsum's Westminster diet, some people respond really well to it, some people respond quite well to it, and some people don't get as good a response to it. So we felt that that what we should do is we should have 2 levels of dietary change. So the level 1 diet changes, or the step 1 diet changes, are the Westminster dietary guidelines with the new food analysis on phytanic acid added in. And those diet changes are recommended for everybody with Refsum disease. The level 2 or step 2 dietary changes are for those people who have not had a good response to the level 1 diet. So if your levels are great following the level 1 diet, you do not need to follow the level 2 dietary changes. The level 2 dietary changes are only recommended for people who have not had a good response to following the level 1 dietary changes. Next slide, please. So our level 1 dietary guidelines are firstly to eliminate the main causes of high phytanic acid levels in the blood. So those foods are now presented in traffic light guidance. And I'm going to hand over to Sarah to go through those food categories. Thank you, Sarah.
Brilliant. Thank you, Eleanor. So the next 8 slides, Zenica, next slide, thank you. So the next 8 slides, I'm going to talk through the lists of foods that can be eaten freely, ones that need to be had in moderation, and ones that need to be avoided. And all of the information I'm giving today is outlined in the diet guide. So please don't feel you need to take note of all the points I mentioned or all the foods on the screen. There is a lot of lists that will be shown. The full diet guide, as Susan mentioned, will be available on the Global Dare website and along with this recording. So you're welcome to go back and listen to it again. As we move through each food category, I'm going to discuss some of the key updates that have occurred in the 2024 diet guide update and how they might differ to the previous one in 2022. The next 2 slides are outlining foods that are high in protein, which can be consumed freely on a Refsum diet. And protein is an important nutrient for satiety, but also for maintenance of muscle growth and development. And it should make up at least 1/3 of your portion on your plate. So it is a significant part of each meal. The key foods I'm going to discuss, or the main updates under each of the categories shown on the screen. So there's meat and eggs, seafood, meat alternatives, and legumes. So a lot of the foods under meat will be very familiar, meat and eggs that you would have had in the previous guide, such as chicken, duck breast, eggs, and turkey. But some of the new updates are that chicken liver has now been added to the green-free section, and this is based on recent food analysis. You'll also see that a big change is that lean pork, low-fat ham, and bacon with the fat removed have also moved into the green section of foods that we can eat freely. So a bit of background on this, when considering recent analysis of pork and also historical analysis of pork, phytanic acid levels vary greatly, and this has been a big discussion within our group. However, the more recent analysis of pork had shown that phytanic acid was low, and pigs themselves are not ruminant animals, but like fish, depending on what they eat, what they're fed, they potentially could store some phytanic acid in the fat of their bodies. So for this reason, we have recommended that lean cuts or low cuts of pork are safe, and they are now on the green section. Prawns, shrimp, sole, and coli have also moved from the amber list onto the green list to give more variety in seafood, along with foods that were already there, such as the clams and scallops and lobster. Meat alternatives, corn and tofu, were previously in the 2022 guide, and these remain here, and recent analysis that we've had in 2023 have confirmed that they are still low in phytanic acid. Chickpeas and edamame beans were previously in the amber list, the caution list, but have now moved to the green list. And this is due to the fact that the level 1 advice, as Eleanor has explained in the previous slides, now only considers phytanic acid. So if following level 1 advice, chickpeas and edamame beans can be eaten freely. But if phytanic acid levels continue to be high despite following all the points in level 1 advice and someone was moving on to the level 2 advice, these foods would need to be consumed in moderation as they do contain some phytal esters, which I'll discuss further on in the presentation. Next slide, please. The next slide outlines nuts and seeds, as well as milk and milk alternatives and cheese alternatives. So there is now a greater range of nuts and seeds on the green list, which we're really pleased about. This is due to some further food analysis and testing that's been done, and also now that we're only considering phytanic acid in the level 1 advice. Like the legumes on the previous page, there are some nuts and seeds that do contain moderate amounts of phytal esters. So if someone was needing to follow the level 2 advice, some of these foods may need to be consumed in moderation, and that will be described later on in the presentation. There have been some new additions to the milk and the milk alternatives based on recent analysis. Fat-free cow's yogurt can now be eaten freely, as well as milk up to 2% fat has been tested and is fine to consume freely, as long as it doesn't have any added DHA or omega-3. And dairy-free whipping cream has also come back as low in phytanic acid. We've had vegan cheeses and vegan cheese spread on the list previously, but more recently, the analysis of mozzarella found that fat-free mozzarella is low in phytanic acid. However, it is important to ensure that it is fat-free mozzarella because we also tested light and low fat, and that did contain significant amounts of phytanic acid. Next slide, please. Cereals and cereal products remain unchanged. So varieties of breakfast cereals, breads, flours, pastas, grains, oats, rice are all low in phytanic acid and continue to be eaten freely. Fruits and vegetables have always been grouped as all fruits and vegetables are okay to eat freely, so that continues. But you will notice a change when it comes to vegetables. So previously we've listed vegetables that have been tested, and the reason we listed them was that our categorizing of foods was based, as Eleanor described, on the 3 different fat components. So phytanic acid, as well as phytol, fatty esters, and free phytols when we considered where vegetables were categorized. So now that we are waiting for further research to understand how free phytols and phytol fatty esters influence phytanic acid, we've revisited the vegetable list, and all vegetables, frozen or fresh, are low in phytanic acid and therefore can be eaten freely as part of the level 1 advice. Fats and oils continue the same, so variety of vegetable oils, vegetable and vegan spreads can be had, but you will notice that there's been the addition of nuts and seed oils that are made from any of the nuts and seeds that were listed on the previous slides can also be consumed. So there's been further analysis of oils to understand more about their phytol content. And from this analysis, there was very limited phytanic acid. So those can be consumed. For example, on the previous page, sesame was listed. So sesame seed oil would be appropriate. Peanuts were listed as an appropriate nut. So peanut oil can be now consumed freely. However, we have added a comment that flaxseed or linseed oil will need to be limited or avoided. This oil in particular doesn't actually contain high levels of phytanic acid, but it is particularly high in phytol esters. So as part of the level 1 advice, we decided to include it because it may in fact be in high enough levels that could influence phytanic acid in the body. Next slide, please. And lastly, under the foods that can be eaten freely, miscellaneous, there's a variety of different foods that are very similar from the previous diet advice, different sources, herbs, spices, and stocks. The only new update on this list of foods is cocoa powder, which has been recently analysed and found to be low in phytanic acid. Next slide, please. We now move on to the caution or the amber category. So these are foods that need to be limited because they do have a moderate amount of phytanic acid. And the recommendation is to restrict foods to a 100-gram portion in total, so any one or any of combinations of the foods listed on the screen per day. The key changes to this list, so previously Frankfurter sausages and veal were under meats. Rabbit has now moved from green to amber. Rabbit has been analysed historically and previously, and there is quite a variation in phytanic acid. So as a caution, we are recommending keeping it in moderate portion sizes. The fattier cuts of pork, such as streaky bacon, fatty bacon, pork belly, pork sausages, salami. As I mentioned earlier, pigs are not ruminant animals, but depending on what they eat, there could be a lot of phytanic acid in the fat portion of these cuts of meat. And so for this reason, we have recommended keeping fattier cuts in moderation or in caution. The under dairy, the fat-free and low-fat cottage cheese, they're new additions. They were based on recent analysis. Seafood remains the same as our last diet sheet. So calamari, dressed crab, herring, tinned tuna all remain in the caution list. Under legumes, baked beans, we've kept this here. This is based on older analysis showing the moderate amounts of phytanic acid in baked beans, but we have put this food forward for further testing when food testing is re-established. And just to note, we did previously have vegetables and nuts listed in the caution section, but there are no nuts, seeds, or vegetables that need to be limited as part of the level 1 advice. Next slide, please. Now moving on to the foods to be avoided. So these foods are high in phytanic acid. In terms of meats and seafoods, there's been no further updates to these lists, with the exception of prosciutto or dried pork meats moving from the previously on this section, the avoid section, have now moved to the amber category. But the foods that we've known for a very long time are very high in phytanic acid, such as beef, lamb, venison, they remain on this list, along with pork offal, which historically has been shown to be high, and this includes pork tongue, liver, and kidney. In terms of seafood, cod, just mentioning a few, fresh tuna, haddock, salmon, trout, those all remain on the avoid list as they are high in phytanic acid. Next slide, please. So this slide is quite busy. There's lots of words on here. It is just covering the milk and milk products that need to be avoided, cheese products, cereals, and vegetables. So in terms of the milk products, they are all the same as previously listed. All the different dairy creams, full fat milks, or any milk that contains omega-3 or DHA, full fat yogurt or ice cream. In terms of cheeses, we've had 2 further analysis more recently. Halloumi and cream cheese have been analysed, and both come back as confirmed high in phytanic acid. With vegetables, there's no particular vegetable in its plain form that needs to be avoided, but we've just mentioned here that if there's any instant mashed potato or any other vegetable that is packaged, it potentially could have a dairy or milk in the ingredients list. So just to check the ingredients list, and if it does contain dairy, it would need to be avoided. And same with cereal and cereal products. These are only breads and cereals that contain dairy. All others can be consumed freely. And again, there are no nuts or seeds that need to be avoided as part of this new diet update and the level 1 guidance. Next slide, please. The last slide to list the foods are fats and oils, miscellaneous and biscuit and confectionery products that need to be avoided. Again, these are all very similar to the previous diet guide. I just wanted to mention that algae oil and again the flaxseed and linseed oil we have listed under the level 1 advice. These again do not contain phytanic acid, but they are significantly high in phytyl esters, and so it has been decided that they are best included as part of level 1 advice because consuming these could influence phytanic acid levels. So I'm now going to hand back to Eleanor, who's just going to talk further on the points to consider for level 1 guidance. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. So we think our clinical experience has suggested that dietary patterns and addressing dietary patterns is a really important part of managing adult Refsum's disease. What a lot of people with adult Refsum's disease do is that a lot of them focus on avoiding the high phytanic acid foods, but they don't focus quite so much on eating patterns. And we think that that may be one of the reasons why some people do not respond as well to the dietary guidelines as others. So just to go through these dietary patterns in perhaps a little bit more detail. So starting with meal frequency. We think that it is important that you have breakfast, lunch, an evening meal, and a bedtime snack. And that if you have 4 hours or more between your meals, then we would recommend that you have a snack. And that snack should be something that contains carbohydrate. It's particularly important to have the bedtime snack and the breakfast, as if either of those are missed, potentially the period of time fasting is large enough to cause the release of significant amounts of phytanic acid from the liver. We believe that it's very important not to follow a low carbohydrate diet and to make sure that all meals contain a portion of carbohydrate. The reason for this guidance is that carbohydrate is the preferred fuel for the body. So when adequate carbohydrate is not provided, what automatically happens is that the body will either deaminate protein and use that as a carbohydrate substitute, which takes a while to happen, or the body will release fat from fat stores and break down muscle. And both of those things potentially will cause an increase in blood phytanic acid levels. So following a low carbohydrate diet is not recommended. And those of you who have diabetes, we would recommend looking at the type of carbohydrate you have And that would be something that you could discuss with your own dietitian. And it, generally speaking, we would recommend low glycemic index carbohydrate choices for those of you who do have diabetes. Exercising is something that is really helpful for people with adult Refsum disease. It can help with mood. It can help maintain muscle strength. So it's an important thing to do, and we would not like you to think that we are advising against exercise. We're not advising against exercise. However, we are advising you to avoid exercise after an overnight fast. So it's important that you have some carbohydrate before you exercise. So if you are working and you're planning on going to the gym after waking up, and you were thinking about having your breakfast after going to the gym, then we would recommend that you have some carbohydrate before your gym session, and then follow up with your normal breakfast afterwards. We do understand that exercising on a full stomach is not an attractive thing, can make you feel quite nauseous. So there are other carbohydrate sources that you can use that would have a good effect. Like, can you go back a slide, please? Like fruit juice, for example, or a cereal bar. No, next slide, please. Thank you. Our dietary guidelines around exercise also talk about making sure that if you're exercising for more than 45 minutes, that you have a snack at 45 minutes containing carbohydrate. So if you were having a 90-minute walk, then we would recommend that you have a carbohydrate-based snack at 45 minutes into the walk. A high caffeine intake is not recommended because caffeine and high caffeine products can increase fat turnover. So they can cause you to break down some of your fat, and that would release phytanic acid. That doesn't mean that you need to completely avoid caffeine. It just means that we would recommend a moderate caffeine intake. So that means avoiding high caffeine drinks like Red Bull, for example. Other caffeinated drinks are, I'm sure, available, but they would also not be recommended. And moderating your coffee and tea intake. So a moderate intake is regarded as 2 drinks. Next slide, please. Other factors that cause a rise in phytanic acid, weight loss is important to avoid, particularly if your phytanic acid reading is high. We've had several occurrences in the past where patients have reached a big birthday and have therefore decided to embark on self-improvement, which for them means that they would like to lose weight, and that has caused a high phytanic acid level because the weight was lost too quickly. So any weight-reducing diet should be a weight-reducing diet that is moderate and that causes slow weight loss. We would also recommend that if you are following a weight-reducing diet, that you are in touch with your Refsum's team, and perhaps you have your phytanic acid level measured more frequently during your weight-reducing phase. I hope that you're all familiar with the emergency regimen guidelines for when you are unwell. These were previously discussed extensively, and I know there is a video about following the emergency regimen guidelines on the Global DARE website. And just as a reminder, the reason for following the emergency guidelines is because illness can increase the release of the breakdown of fat and the release of phytanic acid from liver and other fat stores, resulting in a large increase in phytanic acid. Any of you who are unfortunate enough to require surgery are advised to contact your Refsum's physician if you need to have surgery, so that appropriate surgical guidelines can be followed. These surgical guidelines would be likely to involve trying to be early on in the surgical list so that the amount of time that you are fasted for is minimized, and that glucose is given intravenously or orally before, during, and after surgery, and that feeding is started as soon as possible after resuscitation following surgery. Exercise I have already briefly discussed. So that's the end of our level 1 dietary guidelines. I'd now like to hand over to Sarah to present our level 2 dietary guidelines, which are purely for people whose phytanic acid readings are not well controlled despite following the level 1 dietary guidelines. And over to you, Sarah.
Thank you. Susan, could you mind putting on the next slide? Thank you. So as Eleanor mentioned, if after following all the level 2 guidance, so the dietary as well as thinking about fueling around exercise, regular meals, having adequate carbohydrates, limiting caffeine and keeping weight stable or slow, steady weight loss, if phytanic acid levels continue to be high, then the level 2 guidance is the next step that we would recommend considering. It's not necessary to follow these guidelines if phytanic acid is well controlled. Again, the level 2 guidance, we have considered it in the traffic light system. And foods are categorized based on phytyl fatty ester content. So a lot of the more recent analysis has considered phytyl fatty esters, and the assay or the analysis of that, we are getting information that we can confidently use and understand how much phytyl esters will be entering into the body. Of course, we do need to do further research to understand then how that phytyl esters translates to phytanic acid, which is work that we're continuing to talk about in Global DARE. The current food analysis does not consider free phytols for level 2, the data we have on free phytols is not conclusive, and so therefore has not been considered in the level 2 guide. Next slide, please. The first consideration is the amber foods, which are foods that have been found to have moderate amounts of phytyl fatty esters. And again, we've recommended a total portion of 100 grams of any one or any combination of the below foods taken per day. Now, I appreciate the foods listed here. Some of them you would never have a 100-gram portion. That would be quite significant, but there are some foods such as chickpeas, maybe vegan products, broccoli, that could add up to 100 grams. So firstly, you'll notice on here there is a list of some nuts, seeds, and also oils that relate to those nuts and seeds. So such as sesame seed oil, or the sesame seed itself, tahini, which would be made from the white sesame seeds, pumpkin seeds, olive oil, soya oil, peanut oil, peanuts themselves, pecans, and peanut butter. So these are foods that are on the level 1 okay to have, but if someone was needing to consider the level 2 advice, they do contain moderate phytyl fatty esters and will need to be consumed in moderate amounts. There's also some vegetables such as broccoli, rocket or arugula, the red and yellow peppers, green olives, and legumes such as the edamame beans and the chickpeas. And again, these will feature in level 1 advice, but need to be limited under level 2 guidance. Not all vegetables so for example, where it mentions peppers or olives, there are certain colors that are specifically found to be high in phytoesters. So while green olives need to be limited, black olives are okay. And while red and yellow peppers need to be limited, green peppers are still okay to have and can be eaten freely. We've also made a note that while vegan or dairy-free butters, cheese spreads, and whipping creams are okay to have freely as part of level 1 advice, if they do contain any of the oils, such as peanut oil or soy oil, they do need to be limited when considering level 2 guidance. Next slide, please. The next slide contains a list of foods that are high in phytoesters, and we would recommend avoiding these as part of the level 2 guidance. Flaxseed and linseed oil, the black sesame seeds, sunflower seeds, golden flaxseed, kale, soya burger, specifically Beyond Beef. That specific product has been analysed and was found to be high, where other products more specific to corn or tofu have been okay. Dark chocolate and dairy-free and vegan cheese alternatives that contain the linseed or flaxseed oil. So dark chocolate was recently analysed, and while we know that it's low in phytanic acid, it has been found to be high in phytoesters and therefore is part of the level 2 advice. Next slide, please. So putting this into practice, that's the end of the advice around level 2. And we thought we'd just finish with a few slides showing some simple switches between that bring to life some of the concepts we've discussed. So the first slide is focused on phytanic acid content of food. So that would be under level 1 advice. And there is an example here where someone who may be previous to being diagnosed with Refsums could be having a croissant with butter and a coffee for breakfast. As we know, these are high in phytanic acid, both the croissant and the butter, and the caffeine, if not had in moderation, could also affect phytanic acids. So switching through to wholemeal bread, a vegan spread that doesn't contain any of the flaxseed oils, and an egg to include a protein source that is low in phytanic acid, and an orange juice, for example, would make it an appropriate low phytanic acid meal. Next slide, please. The next example also fits under the category of the level 1 guidance, and this is around calories. Having, for example, 1 slice of toast and a cup of tea in the morning to get you started for the day and to break the overnight fast wouldn't be enough calories. And if this wasn't followed by a snack shortly after, could potentially lead to some breakdown in fats, mobilizing of fats in the body, which could release phytanic acid. So a more appropriate breakfast that would meet calories and get someone fueled for the day would be 2 slices of toast. So this would provide more carbohydrates, along with maybe some soya yogurt or some fat-free yogurt and a piece of fruit and a cup of tea. Next slide, please. And just one last example that crosses both level 1 and level 2 guidance, if someone was following both. A lunch that had a chicken breast with a rocket salad, carrots and an apple. So this lunch as it is would be very low in carbohydrates, and and would contain foods that are moderately high in phytal esters. Obviously, the rocket is something that's on the caution section, so you can have it as part of your 100-gram portion in the day, but if over the day there were other foods had, this might exceed the recommended portion size for the phytal esters in the moderate or caution section. So switching this through to an example of a meal or lunch meal that would be more appropriate would be a chicken salad sandwich containing bread, so that would provide carbohydrates, some lettuce, vegan spread, tomato, along with some crisps and an apple. So this would provide carbohydrate and also be lower in phytal esters. Next slide, please. So just to finish up, the new diet guide that Eleanor and I have presented today will be uploaded onto the Global Dare website in the next month, both a PDF copy as well as a web page designed to present the information. We did want to make a note that it is just general guidance. And while we hope it provides enough information for people to feel they're equipped and informed with the information to start making changes to their diet, individualized guidance and advice should still be consulted through your dietitian or healthcare team, because it really will depend on someone's phytanic acid, which is really individualized, and also the types of foods they're eating, the portion sizes they're having, their food patterns over the day. So important to link in with your team. We know that Refsum is a rare condition, and so if your dietitian or health professional is not familiar or confident with the condition, they can contact us for more specific guidance, and our contact details are included at the end of the diet sheet. So we are very happy for those to be shared with your team. The diet guide will continue to change and evolve. We're learning more and more about food as more analysis is being done, and we're also learning more about Refsums, and there is a lot on the agenda for further research to understand free phytols and phytol esters. So this will continue to change, and we hope to continue to give more updates to help improve the dietary management of Refsums. But your experience is really important in guiding us into what research we do, and your feedback is so valued in terms of how we evolve the diet guide. So please continue to give your feedback either to your healthcare team that they can then pass on to us, or to the Global Dare Foundation. Next slide, please. Thank you. And I'll pass it back to Susan for leading on questions.
Excellent. Okay. Thank you very much, Eleanor and Sarah. That was very informative. And I think our listeners are very appreciative that you took the time to explain, why we're going into the level 1 and level 2 guidance, and what it means in terms of the traffic light system across both of the guidances. So hopefully this is going to expand the choice of foods, especially for people who have, well-controlled phytanic acid levels. And actually, that brings me to a question that I wanted to ask, because I expect that this question will probably come. You talk about, if your levels are well controlled, then, continue to follow the level 1 guidance. Would you want to suggest a level, up to a certain level where you could consider the phytanic acid levels being well controlled? Yeah, the question has come in the. Well, yeah. Yeah.
Eleanor, did you want to start on that?
I can do. So it's actually quite a broad answer here, because it's possible to have an individual with adult Refsum disease who maybe was diagnosed 2 years ago, and they have had a starting level of 1500, and their reading is coming down, but it's just got to 800. In which case we would say that the diet is working and they're responding really well. Or there might be a person who has been diagnosed with adult Refsum disease for a long time, whose readings are stable at around 200 or 150 or less. And that person, we would also say, is having a good response to the diet. A person who is not having a good response to a diet would be a person who is not showing any decrease, or whose readings remain stubbornly high despite following all the level 1 guidance. I hope that answers your question. Is there anything you want to add to that, Sarah?
No, I agree. I think it's about the trend and assessing what someone is currently doing.
I mean, what we do find is it's never a straight line down, because if you have it checked every time you go to clinic, and you only go to clinic twice a year, and let's say you maybe have had flu or gastroenteritis or something 3 weeks before you go for your Refsums review, and you have your blood taken then you may find that your reading is a bit higher. but it's because you've been unwell, not because the diet is not working. So there's a bit of nuance there in how you think about your response. We really don't expect to see it continuously go down. It's just that if you plot your readings on a graph, you should see either a gradual decrease or stability around a low to moderate level.
Right. So, Eleanor, there's a question in the chat that along those lines, like, how long would you wait to say that the level 1 diet is not sufficient and that we should introduce the level 2 guidance?
I think it's when you look at the trend. So if the overall trend is to be gradually coming down, then I don't think you need to make any changes, because when you add in extra levels of restriction, you automatically make things more difficult. So if you've stopped seeing a decrease and you've plateaued maybe at 800 and you're not going down below 800, you're just hovering there, then maybe you might want to think about looking at level 2 guidance. Do you agree with that, Sarah?
Yes, I agree. And we know that phytanic acid can take quite a long time to come down if levels are high. So I think giving it that time and watching the trend and maybe talking with the team about frequency of monitoring so that you can see kind of the outcomes of the diet, not on sort of a weekly basis. It can take time, but maybe every 6 months or 4 to 6 months, so that you can see that is continuing to come down. And if it is showing a response, as Eleanor said, I think I would just continue with level 1 until the plateau is hit.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Turning to some diet-specific questions. So, was the free phytal previously considered in the diet guide? Which foods are no longer included in the diet guide because of free phytal?
Yes. So the previous diet guide considered phytal fatty esters, free phytols, and phytanic acid on a 1-to-1 ratio. And so all the foods that are now listed in level 2 were restricted as part of, were previously restricted in the previous diet guide, with the exception of a couple of foods that are new analysis that we've learnt of. So all level 1, level 2s were previously limited. And then there was, for example, say the chickpeas or edamame beans, they were in the caution list because we added phytanic acid and phytol esters together, assuming they both had an impact on phytanic acid in the blood, and therefore they sat in the amber category. But if we remove the phytol esters, yes, from it, and only consider phytanic acid, it is now moved into the green. So a lot of foods have moved forward from amber to green, or from red to amber, or have moved into level 2 advice.
Right.
So you will definitely notice, I would recommend, if you're currently holding a diet guide that's from the previous one, 2022, I would replace that with the new one, because there are significant changes.
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah.
And then there's a comment about the flaxseed and the linseed appearing in both level 1 and level 2 red sections.
Yeah. And the reason for that is they are high in phytol fatty esters. They're not high in phytanic acid. So true to our rule, they don't technically sit in level 1, because level 1 is only based on phytanic acid. But the level was so significantly high that we felt that if someone was using that as part of their diet, it may potentially influence phytanic acid. And so therefore we've put that in the level 1 advice.
Right, so just really erring on the side of caution.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, then there's a question about cutoff. So what makes, or how much phytanic acid makes a product to be categorized in the green, amber, or red group?
Mm-hmm. So the categorizing of foods is based on the assumption that our the body can still process around 10 milligrams of phytanic acid a day through omega oxidation. And so any food that is below 2 milligrams per 100 grams a day is in the green section. Anything that sits between 2 and 5 milligrams of phytanic acid per 100 grams is in the amber, and anything above 5 milligrams per 100 grams a day is in the red category. So it is possible that if, depending on someone's, and that's why it's good to work alongside your dietitian or healthcare professional team, depending on someone's eating pattern, if there was a food that was in the green section that was potentially high and you ate a lot of it at every single meal, it could add up. But we feel, based on how people generally eat and have a variation in their diet, that the ones below 2 milligrams should be absolutely fine. But the ones between 2 and 5 milligrams per 100 grams, we put that portion category of 100 grams a day to caution not having large amounts of those, because that could easily add up.
Yeah. Okay, then a question regarding nuts. So did I understand that there are no nuts to be avoided anymore at level 1, like there used to be? Not all nut levels yet known.
Correct. Yeah. So first question is no nuts need to be avoided at level 1. That's correct. No nuts that are, so nuts that are on the, sorry, I'll reword that. Nuts that are on the list for level 1 advice can be had freely. There's no nuts that on that list that need to be cautioned or avoided. But we haven't analysed all nuts. So we've got the list there in the level 1 guidance, and any ones that are on there, or their oils versions or their butter versions, such as peanut butter or almond butter, can be consumed freely as part of level 1 advice.
But we have analysed the majority of the most common nuts.
Yes, and all of those are listed there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, and then do you recommend people currently following the Refsum diet to reintroduce level 2 foods?
Yes.
Assuming that levels are well controlled.
Yes, I think that would be a good one to have in discussion with the dietitian, your healthcare professional team, and also depends on how much you would have of those, and with monitoring your levels. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay.
Sorry, Susan, can I just add in? I think it is also really important to think about your dietary patterns, though. So although we are very much focused in this discussion here on talking about foods in different lists, please don't ignore the dietary patterns, because we think that these are really important. So when you are reintroducing your level 2 foods or having a discussion with your healthcare professionals, do think about your dietary patterns. So your carbohydrate intake, etc.
Okay, and then would you switch to level 2 guidance solely due to neurological symptoms, regardless of phytanic acid levels?
Do you want to comment on this one?
I think the answer to that is no, because there are lots of reasons why people can have neurological symptoms, and I think that is something that you would need to discuss with your team.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think it's an automatic switch.
You'd want to just investigate if there's anything else going on concomitantly.
I think so. I mean, usually if people do have neurological symptoms, it's because they've either got very high levels or their levels have just spiked and are then coming down, and the nerves have all got very irritated by that spike. So you would, be expecting to wait for an improvement. But there are, of course, other people who've had Refsum for a long time who have a lot of neurological symptoms. So I have over the years met some people who have got a lot of neurological symptoms, whose readings it's difficult to see how well they've been controlled over the years because their readings haven't been checked very often. So I think it's difficult to generalize. So I think I would say you have to discuss it with your team, really.
Yeah.
Yes. Do you agree with that, Sarah?
Yes, I agree. I think a lot of the time where there's a new onset of these symptoms, it's due to a change in levels, mostly going high, and that could be because of recent illness or weight loss. And I think those points need to also be closely reviewed and checked, not just the diet aspect.
Yeah, okay. And then one last question. We're at time, so any advice on the portion size of a carbohydrate snack, such as before exercise or bedtime?
So Eleanor, I feel like this is you're the brilliant carbohydrate advisor.
That's a difficult one, but I think that really you're looking at 20 grams. Because when we talk about total carbohydrate intake, I mean, most of you will probably not be aware of carbohydrate values of food, and I don't think it's necessarily necessary for you to be aware of carbohydrate values of food, but your dietitians certainly should be aware of carbohydrate values of food. So I think we are really looking at about 10 to 20 grams as a snack, and then probably 70 to 80 grams as a meal. So prior to exercise, I think you are looking at least 20 grams of carbohydrate. So as a food, that might be so a little carton of fruit juice gives you about 15 grams. A big banana will give you about 20 grams. A medium or a thick slice of toast will give you about 20 grams. Trying to think of other examples. Does that help, those examples?
It helps, definitely. I expect that we'll continue to get additional questions. There are some questions in the chat that we haven't been able to address due to our time constraints. So if it's okay with you, maybe we can do it like last time. We'll continue to collect feedback and questions and then pass everything over to you, Sarah and Eleanor, and maybe have you answer them in writing, and then we can share them with the community and participants. That'd be great. Okay. So I'm going to end the meeting now. I'd like to thank everybody for your participation today. I hope that you're as pleased with the diet changes as us at Global Dare are. We'll continue to be in contact about the diet. And as said, the recording and the diet sheet will be posted on the Global Dare website shortly. And we'll also be circulating the written form of the diet amongst the community. So thank you all, and have a good rest of the day.